Welcome to the Messy City Podcast, where we talk with the people who design, plan, build, develop, or even just think about how to create beautiful, successful, and humane cities and towns. Let's learn from each other and create places we truly care about. Welcome back to the Messy City Podcast. This is Kevin Klinkenberg, joined by Jed Byrne today from Raleigh, North Carolina. Jed, I've corresponded with a little bit in the past, and he was actually here in Kansas City not long ago on a sort of one of those Chamber of Commerce type field trips to another city. And we had the chance to just briefly meet in person and thought that it would be interesting to do a podcast. I really want to talk a lot about similarities or differences between what he saw in Kansas City versus Raleigh and the Triangle area. So with that, welcome, Jed. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. It's great to make this happen.
Well, I'm glad we could do it. We had a bit of a snafu getting this going originally, but these things happen in the entertainment world, right?
To be fair, we did not have a snafu. I had a snafu, and Kevin, you were very gracious. But yes, as an avid listener of Messy City, it's nice to be on the microphone for once.
Well, I appreciate it. And why don't we tell folks a little bit about yourself? You're in commercial real estate and other things, but you have an interest in all things small development. But why don't you give the CV so people understand where you're coming from?
Sure. Yeah. So I've got a varied career in the real estate realm. Started out after engineering school in a kind of more industrial construction capacity, went back to grad school to transition into real estate development. So went to grad school at UNC in their business school program and spent about 9 years on the commercial development side of the business. So I was working for a multifamily development group, office, REIT. I worked for a local kind of entrepreneurial group that did a little bit of everything here in Raleigh. So spent, again, about 10 years on the development side of the business. For the last 4 years have transitioned over onto the consulting side. So now I do business development for a local North Carolina based design and engineering firm. And so now developers are my clients, but have had a very big and broad interest in local real estate. And so when I was on the institutional side of the business, very much favored small scale projects, although we can talk about that, but it's
Sure.
challenging to do those projects when you work for a firm that is really built to do institutional sized deals.
Right.
And now that I'm a bit removed from that, still very much focused on small scale community based development. Would like to get back into that at some point on my own account. And really, I think where we connected was more along the lines of, I think in the next few years, I would like to spend a bunch of my, I don't know if I have free time, but a bunch of my time trying to cultivate to the best of my ability more of the small scale development ecosystem, because I think there's not only a huge need for it, but there is a lot of people who are very much interested, and it feels like the group is just kind of out there. And so bringing people together, I've always seen a lot of benefit in, and that's really kind of where my focus is these days. But yeah, all things places and spaces in Raleigh, North Carolina. All my hobbies are related to real estate. So this is what I spend most of my time thinking about.
And you also have a little podcast that you do as well?
I do. Yep. Podcast is related to places and spaces of North Carolina. So Dirt NC. Been doing that for a few years. And again, it's great opportunity to, as you know, connect with people and share some of the stories that I was privileged to hear myself. And so it's kind of like, okay, well, if I can record it, then more people get to learn from it, which has been really awesome. Also send a weekly newsletter around Raleigh development, have for, 8 years now. So that goes out every Tuesday morning, called the Top 5, and just kind of shares what's going on in the market for both people who are in the development industry and lay people. Again, just kind of a way to educate people, or try to help educate people around the development space, because one of my biggest ongoing kind of theses is the more people understand about how development happens, the better places and spaces we can create. And again, I'm not trying to tell people what the better means. I think people have, as you know, have a lot of opinions on that, and that's fine. But I think even if your opinions differ from mine on what you see as a better outcome for a city, if you don't know how those pieces fall into place, I think it's very hard to have a conversation around those issues. It's very hard to make progress towards the future that you want to see. So I just very much believe that more people should be educated around how development works and how it happens.
I mean, it sounds a little bit like you think that people who care about housing and development should actually know a little something about housing and development and
It helps.
how it
It helps.
manifests itself.
Yeah, and again, as someone who came from the industry, we don't do ourselves much of a
Yeah.
favor in being transparent all the time, right? And I think that's one of the structural
Yeah.
challenges is on the deal by deal basis, you kind of have to be secretive because there's a lot on
Hmm.
the line.
Right.
And if I'm working on a project and I share something with you, that's risk. And development is really just a risk mitigation business. And
Right.
so the less risk is I can take on as a developer, the better. And so again, it's as an industry, it's kind of designed to be a little bit of a black box. It's also very much complicated. And so
Hmm.
even for people who spend all of their time working on it and thinking about it, I think people learn new things all the time. And so
Yeah.
I imagine, and I've been told repeatedly that other people have lots of things going on in their life too. And so,
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
isn't the thing that's on the top of their minds all the time, which
Right.
is fair. I think we're maybe in a different group. We think about it more than most, but when the orange cones or orange barrels start showing up in front of their house or the crane comes out, then they get very interested. And at that point, there's not a whole lot that can happen.
Yeah. Well, and over time, what's happened is there's sort of a almost like a Rubik's cube of a problem within the industry in terms of talking about things because as development processes and regulations have metastasized to become extraordinarily complex, and you have to seek approvals from multiple boards or commissions to get just about anything done, it makes that process inherently political, which makes developers less likely to want to be public about issues they have, because at some point they're going to need approvals for various projects, and so it's a weird thing. And so, at least one thing I've experienced is it makes people cautious about speaking up.
Yeah, I try to, outside of the local level, I try to stay out of politics. Politics is, get complicated real
Right.
quick. I think it is inherently political because it's local, but I think again that goes back to risk. It's
Yeah.
if and the story I like to share, which is not a great story, but when I was in the development industry, there's a moment in time I wish I could take back, and it goes
Mm.
to sharing information and risk, and nothing bad happened, but I was out in front of a project I was working on. We were redeveloping a warehouse into offices and a little donut shop out front. So adaptive reuse, great project, infill. It was fantastic. And again, I was in, kind of the most driver of the driver's seat, right? These decisions, if the developer's in control, I had a good say on what was going to happen. And a neighbor came by, and we were talking in the street, and she made the comment that, she hopes we don't put crepe myrtles in front of this building. And it was an odd comment on lots of levels, but especially because I don't like crepe myrtles. And so I said, lady, you're in luck. Not only am I helping manage this project, but I also don't like crepe myrtles, and we're not planning to put in crepe myrtles here. So
Mhm.
the project's in good hands, and you should get what you want. Because a lot of times neighbors come by and they have comments and they say, well, hey, we had people say we don't want anything to happen on this lot. We don't want it to change. And a lot of times there's not a whole lot you can do about that. But the crepe myrtle one, I thought for sure. I was like, this is not a
Yeah.
problem. There's no risk in sharing that I don't want to put a crepe myrtle here. Flash forward to a few days before we were getting our certificate of occupancy to move into the building. The fringe tree that I had chosen to put in the street right where we had that conversation, which I thought was a beautiful tree, turns out is not on the City of Raleigh approved street tree planting list. And so the urban forester says, we can't give you your certificate of occupancy until you change out this tree. So I said, great, send me the list. Talked to my landscape team, and I said, I'm going to send you a list. You tell me what's available on this list. And of course, the only thing on that list that was available was a crepe myrtle. So forever and always, there's going to be a crepe myrtle at 15:01 sunrise in Raleigh, precisely where I said there wasn't going to be one. And again, that's not a huge risk story, but that is a great example or a real example of where sharing information has very limited upside, but has real downside, right? So
Sure.
if I had said nothing, there would be no upside or downside. But because I said something, I have this fear that this lady is going around thinking that, that dastardly developer was a liar, and he told me there was
Yeah.
going to be no crepe
Yeah.
myrtles, and now there are.
Yeah.
I have not spoken to the person since, so I don't know what she thinks. But
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Those no
you're
good.
better off not sharing information, really.
Yeah, it's a frustrating thing. Those no good developers always go back on their promises.
Correct.
All right. So I have to ask, what's the issue with crepe myrtles? Because when I lived in Savannah, I actually like crepe myrtles a lot.
So I don't know that I have an issue with crepe myrtles, other than they're around a lot and they're all over
Yeah,
the
they're
place.
very, very common in
Very
southern
common,
cities.
and I for whatever reason, I don't have a good reason. It's just in my mind. I thought, well, it'd be nice to put something different. And
Hmm.
again, in this instance, we get to choose, so why not? It wasn't a budget constraint. It wasn't anything. We should have a say, and let's do something interesting. And it absolutely backfired on me.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, actually, I planted a couple of crepe myrtles in my backyard in Savannah.
Again, I like them. I
That's,
do think it's
that's a
weird
funny
as
story.
a non-tree person. I
Yeah.
like trees, but I don't know much about them. The fact that people go around and just chop like the whole top. It's
Oh,
something
yeah.
seems odd about that.
The crepe murder thing is
Great,
just, yeah,
yeah. It
really bizarre. Yeah.
that never sat well with me. I guess maybe you're
Yeah.
supposed to do that.
It's
I
a
don't
weird
know, but
it's a weird look for sure. Yeah.
it is.
Unfortunate. So, how did you end up? Talk a little bit about this group that you came to Kansas City with,
Yeah.
and how you got involved with that.
So the Greater Raleigh Chamber of Commerce every year does an inner city trip, and this was my first year going. I'd heard for years that it was a great trip to go on, and again, as someone who cares very much about places and spaces and urbanism, I had actually never been to Kansas City, but this year that was the destination. We were going to spend 3 or 4 days, depending on when you went out. But there was a kind of contingent of business leaders from across the Triangle area of North Carolina. We all got on planes, flew out to Kansas City, spent a few days there. There's kind of a general theme, and we were spending a lot of time looking at the city from a sports and athletics perspective, as well as children's health care, which are two
Mm,
big topics going on, and kind of very timely issues here in the Triangle. But so again,
mm,
the idea was to take a group of leaders from the Triangle, send them out to Kansas City, explore for a few days, meet the people, meet some leaders from Kansas City, hear the stories, see what has worked, what has been challenging, where there are similarities, where there are differences. And again, I think it's a great way to not only experience a place, but for a lot of these issues that we talk about, it's hard to um, really understand something unless you can see it. And so
yeah.
going to a place that has done something well, you can say, oh, that's what that
Mhm.
transportation looks like, or that's what that arena could look like. And since by definition, the changes that we hope to see here in the Triangle don't yet exist, unless you can see it and touch it, it makes it really hard to share that story. So that's what we did. And it was a great trip all around. I mean, a wonderful, wonderful city, wonderful region. And yeah, couldn't be happier to have gone there.
So, what were some of the quick takeaways that you had about things that you thought um, were good lessons learned, or things that you could take back to the Raleigh Durham area?
I think the again the two main focuses were sports, and so you guys are
Mhm.
crazy on sports and sports everywhere,
Yeah,
and big
yeah.
big
We're
big
sports.
winning teams and big venues, and that was cool to see. I mean, I live not too far from the Lenovo Center, which is where the Hurricanes play. And so, we have some of that, but you guys just take it to another level. We
Mhm,
went to the women's soccer stadium, which again,
mhm,
and this was kind of, I think, blew a lot of people's minds, that was the first purpose-built women's sports arena of any kind, is what we were told. And
mhm.
it was opened what, a handful of years ago. I mean, it's
Two
new.
2 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, wow,
Mhm.
2023. It took us a while to get that
Mhm.
done. We collectively, as the country.
Yeah.
So good job on you guys. Same thing with the children's hospital. They are looking at doing a kind of Duke and UNC Health are teaming up to do the North Carolina Children's Hospital. It's in planning, so it's going to be somewhere in the Triangle. But that was a big target for us, and so spent a lot of time at the Children's Hospital exploring, talking to leadership there. I think the from a urbanist and kind of development perspective, Raleigh has been on such a growth tear for so long that it's very easy to get, I don't know if it's complacent or comfortable, and just you're used to the growth. Well, things are always going to go up and to the right, right?
Right.
Values always go up, and things just get better, and people keep moving here, and nothing's going to change that. And so I think to go to a market where that hasn't been the story, a lot of people
Hmm.
travel, but I think most, again, what I'll consider normal people, not like you and me, don't, when they go to a new city, they don't ask about real estate prices. They don't look at rental rates and all that kind of stuff, and spot for vacant lots, and I think seeing a place that is absolutely on the map and is a, on a lot of people's radar in lots of ways, but doesn't have that aggressive year over year growth, I think was eye
Right.
opening to a lot of people. And again, you and I, and some of the folks on the small scale meetup had conversations just around pricing, and like the idea of being able to buy a house, any house for under $300,000, or
Mm.
a new house for under, shoot, probably 4 or 500,000 in the
Yeah.
greater triangle area. It's just unheard of. And so or that we compared notes on what land values for downtown tower sites are, just big differences.
Yeah.
But again, it's not to say that Kansas City is better or worse. It's got challenges, but it's different challenges than we have.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to build stuff here because sometimes things are too expensive. In other markets, it's hard to build stuff because the rents aren't high enough. And so,
Yeah.
again, it's hard for everything. I do think one of the coolest takeaways, and I didn't want to get off the podcast without telling the story, but at Abby's small scale development meetup, I Ubered out there to go to the coffee shop, and then when I was
Mhm.
leaving, I was talking to Lee, who and he
Sure.
goes, "Well, how are you getting home?" And I said, "Well, I'm just going to Uber." And he goes, "No, you're not." I said, "Yeah, I am." And he goes, "No, you're not. Get in the car." And I was like, "Okay, am I really about to get a ride from a stranger?" And I mean, I met him 25 minutes before, and but that was one of the things they talked about, is this, this Kansas City nice, and I think that was just a great
Yeah.
example of, again, he drove. Gosh, I don't even know, but probably 20, 30 minutes out of his way to just drop me off at the hotel back downtown. And
Hmm.
so, yeah, I mean, lots of great things, lots of excitement, lots of opportunities, and I do think just the spirit of taking action was very real in Kansas City. And also the big takeaway, I think, that was surprising to lots of people, was the philanthropic aspect, right? So we went to some of these projects, and to see and hear how people talked about different families and
Hmm.
organizations that give and give and give, it seemed to just be a very broad spectrum of folks that were involved in that, and that was pretty cool to see. So I get that, to me, was a big thing of like, can we bring that back? And then on the real estate side, the thing I would love to bring back is, we went to a lot of these downtown redevelopment. Was a hotel, then it was office, and now it's multifamily. But these redevelopment projects, when we walked through the financing, the capital stack, to hear about all the different subsidies and sources of financing, and like ways that the the city and the state got involved in helping make
Hmm.
these deals work, was
Yeah.
pretty eye opening. I mean, it was just amazing to hear. And I think that was driven by a challenge. My sense was that was driven by a challenge. 20 years ago, there weren't a lot of people living downtown. So let's
Yeah.
let's fix that. And I think they have, to a good degree, or y'all have to a good degree. And my thought was, well, wouldn't it be nice to have kind of all those tools at your disposal without a big problem? Like, let's not get to the world where we have a
Yeah.
big problem that we need to fix. Let's see if we can make some of these things more feasible, again, without the emergency. I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be cool. Yeah. It's a funny thing because in many ways, we had our downtown office real estate bust here 30 years ago, 30 to 40 years ago. Uh, and so a lot of what you described was really kind of driven out of desperation from all that. Was like, we got to get investment somehow in the
Mhm.
city, and there was a lot of good thinking at the time to recognize that we probably weren't going to recapture a lot of that as office space. There was still a desire and an interest in having major corporate headquarters and such, but we have a uniquely spread out office market in our region. I think we have maybe the lowest percentage of office in our downtown core of any
Hmm.
major city in the country. So really, we were very early to the game to aggressively try to incentivize pushing some of those office buildings into residential conversions. And there are a lot of tools that were used, a lot of different tax incentive and abatement tools, not without controversy, with plenty of controversy involved with all that. But I will say that over the last 5 to 10 years, it's tremendously benefited our city
Yeah.
because with the shift to work from home and the issues with COVID and everything else, our downtown really recovered very, very quickly and recovered to a higher level than many peer downtowns. So that was definitely a kind of a nice validation of like that early push to diversifying the base downtown to be much more mixed use.
Yeah. And I'm not super familiar with the controversy that you speak of, but I can guess. And I think that's back to the education point around real estate. I do think that somebody once told me that, problems have solutions. And I think often that's how the conversation is framed. It's like, oh, well, hey, we have this problem of
Mhm,
vacancy downtown. We need to fix it. I would argue that it's not really a problem because, again, you and I can look at that
mhm,
and have two different outcomes that are favorable. Right? We can be very educated. We can know exactly what we're talking about and disagree. So the saying was, problems have solutions and then situations have outcomes, right? So
yeah, right,
we can't argue about the situation. The situation is vacancy is 47% in office, right? That is a fact. Is
right,
it better to have less vacancy, or is it better? We can disagree on that, but I think when people understand more about the dynamics of the built environment, we can speak more clearly to each other around the desired outcomes and how we get there. Again, is an incentive good or bad? We can have very real, very educated conversations around that, and I don't know that you get
yeah,
everybody to agree, and that's fine. But I think more often than not, people just don't really fully understand, and so you just wind up talking past each other. But I would argue that there are no, solutions. There isn't a right, there isn't a wrong.
right,
There's this constant tension because it is a situation, and the situation is going to have different outcomes, and you know
yeah,
higher housing prices could be good depending on how you look at it, right? Can also
right,
be bad, and it's tough
yeah.
for both of those things to be true at the same time, but they absolutely are.
Yeah, I mean, it's that old saying that there's no solutions, there's only trade-offs.
Yes.
Uh,
Okay.
so,
Great way to put it.
yeah.
100% agreed.
So, uh, the interesting thing is, a lot of those trips that you were on tend to focus on sort of big picture issues, and often a lot of stuff on the big corporate side. But you had the opportunity to sneak away for a little bit and come. We were fortunate we were having one of our monthly small developer meetups while you were in town. So this is something that my friend Abby Newsham organizes, this monthly small developer meetup in a coffee shop, and we get anywhere from 30 to 50 people that attend depending on the topic and everything else. But uh, I know you wanted to talk a little bit about that. You were curious about how that all worked, and tell me a little bit about your impressions of attending that.
Yeah, so the meetup really was fantastic, right? That was I did have the opportunity to sneak away. It kind of seemed meant to be because again, that was the one day of the month that y'all were meeting, and it happened to be the one Monday that I was in town. So the timing was perfect. The group was super welcoming. I literally knew nobody. I knew you were going to be there, and I had obviously listened to your podcast, and we had conversed over email. Um, but walking into the room, I think the first takeaway was it was full, which was great to see. A lot of people interested in small scale development, and it was also just one of the most diverse rooms I've ever been in. I spend a lot of time in rooms talking about real estate and some of the bigger real estate organizations, um, even the chamber trip. This was one of the most diverse, across the spectrum rooms that I'd ever been in surrounding real estate, right? So you had people of all ages, young and old. You had people of all experience levels, right? Some people had whole portfolios of projects that they'd built, and some were just thinking about getting started. Same thing for racial diversity. I mean, you name it, it was represented, which I thought was awesome. And again, from an outsider's perspective, everyone was super friendly. So I made friends when I was there. Already mentioned Lee giving me a ride home afterwards. But it was just an awesome experience. And again, to see that excitement in the room and to see that camaraderie, I think was huge. And that again is something I'd like to figure out a way to bring to the Triangle because I think there's demand for it and there's opportunity. And again, I think it's real estate, like all things, community are better the more people you have at the table. And I think small scale development is a great way to get more people engaged in the
Mhm.
development process, even if they're not the developers, right? They'll be part of the conversation. They'll be neighbors. They'll be investors. They'll be design consultants. All the above. The more projects you do, the more people you can get involved. So I think it was just really exciting to see, and I'm glad we had a chance to make it happen.
Yeah, and so it's interesting to me because we both know some people in common. I know a lot of people in the Triangle, and I think it's really a good benchmark for both of us because they're regions that are fairly similar sized. They're also both fairly spread out regions with not like one really dominant city,
Right.
that or jurisdiction that overhangs everything. In our region, Kansas City, Missouri is the largest, but Kansas City, Missouri is only a quarter, not even a quarter of a population of the whole region. And we also have a state line that splits us in half. So there's just a lot of complicating factors. You have this multipolar region as well. So I mean, there's a ton of people in your region doing some of this kind of work. What's that discussion been like locally about having people kind of get together on a regular basis?
So, I mean, I think there's a bunch of groups that are doing a bunch of different things, and again, a lot of them led by people that I know you know. I'm not sure though we have that kind of constant heartbeat of somebody showing up. And again, I just got to give credit to Abby. My sense is, I think she told me she's been doing it for 6 years, but
Yeah.
every month showing up and just it seemed, and I don't want to diminish it by any stretch of imagination because I know it's a lot of work, but I do think it's one of those things where it's if you build it, they will come, right? If you give people a place to go and say, hey, here's what we're going to be doing, and it's going to happen every first Monday of the month, you can start to build that. So there are absolutely groups, and there's certainly development happening and people leading the projects, but I don't know of a, a place or space that it brings everybody together. And so, again, I think that whole just ecosystem idea would be great to have. And if I can help instigate that, I think that'd be
Yeah.
pretty cool.
What do you think some of the things are missing that having an ecosystem like that really helps? Like from a real estate perspective and with the experience you have, what are some of the connections or things that you think really are useful for that?
I think there's, development in general, you're really, it's not a solo sport, right? It's a team
Yeah.
sport. And there are no developers that I know of that are able to do everything by themselves. Um, And so any developer it has their skill set, but the real goal is to marshal the assets together to create a project. And so having just the people to connect with, having someone to say, "Hey, I need a good drywall person, or I need a good framing contractor, or I've got a question about a loan. Who should I talk to?" Just knowing that there are people that are going through it together, I think helps a lot. And it's breaking down those barriers, and I think especially for people starting out, there's so much that you don't know, right? There's the unknown unknowns, and I know of
Yeah.
no better way of tackling that issue than bringing people together. And again, even for the professionals, and again, as now that I sit on the consulting side, there are things that are changing constantly. So even if you do this every day, even if you're the consultant who does this on dozens of projects at a time every day, things change constantly, and so sharing information is a great place to start. And I think just being near proximity goes a long way to breaking down some of those barriers and really kind of showing those unknown unknowns. Because again, people are um, apt to get into a world of risk that they don't understand if they don't know what they're getting into. And development is already risky enough. So why not try to um, share some of that burden with friends? And I think that would be a great place to start.
So tell me about some of the things that are going on that are interesting in the Triangle area, especially from a small development perspective. I know I've talked to Aaron Lubeck,
Mhm.
multiple times, and he kind of tracks a lot of stuff that's happening in Durham in particular, and also at the state legislature level, which is really fascinating in North Carolina. I wonder if you could expand a little bit about what do you see that's encouraging or interesting.
Yeah, so I think, and I'm about to step woefully out of my depth, but I think one of the big differences, and Aaron would be the perfect person to talk about this, and I think he probably already has talked about this with you, but in North Carolina, we're a Dillon rule state, and so we at the city level only get the power that the state allows us to have, and so that creates a lot of interesting situations, let's say, where the local level wants to do something and the state won't allow it, or the state wants to do something and that causes problems at the local level. um, I think you have seen, and as about as staunch of a Raleigh booster as exists, I will gladly say that Durham, I do think, led the way when it came to some of the small lot reform, small scale reform, parking reform that was required to help loosen some of the restraints on some of these projects. They also just have a great, uh, Durham's got great bones. It's got great people, but it's also got great bones. And so I think they kind of led the way. And now, in recent years, Raleigh has removed parking mandates. We have brought in, I think, two waves of missing middle regulation changes that are allowing for more ADUs, small scale development, townhomes in more areas, not without what'd you say, controversy, not without
Hmm.
challenges. There
Hmm.
was a lawsuit there was an infill neighborhood where somebody had proposed buying a 3-acre single family lot and you know building 17 uh, smaller homes on the lot, still large homes and still very expensive. This is one of the most expensive zip codes, if not the most expensive zip code in Raleigh. And sure enough, the neighbors filed a lawsuit that I think not only was aimed at the city, but it was aimed at the individual developers and people
Hmm.
associated with the project. And so that went through several years of um, challenges, let's say, and I think it's recently cleared up. But again, that's the kind of thing that you hear happening in most places, and it's again, it's just a challenge of change is hard and change is
Yeah.
scary. And again, I get it. I don't necessarily want my neighborhood to change, but to me, the tension, the outcomes of not changing are just far worse than the outcomes of changing, and so it's something I don't know people at least have to address. But that's been good, and I think we're heading in a good direction with our missing middle regulations. We're working on rapid transit, so bus rapid transit. They are planning 4 separate lines over the next 10-15 years, which I think will help in a lot of ways. Again, challenges, but I think we're moving in the right direction, and I think it's crazy to see how fast everything changes. And that, I think, there's benefits to growth, and growth fixes a lot of challenges, but it also just creates challenges. And I think one of the things we've seen, especially in COVID, is if you look at the charts for home values and pricing, just the astronomical, 15, 20% year over year appreciation and growth, kind of shows of, hey, here's what happens if you don't have a reactive housing market that just goes up. And so
Hmm.
I think we're hopefully heading in a direction where we will be more responsive to demand, and therefore we will not see you know pricing escalate the way it does. And I'm probably one of the few homeowners who, the house that I'm in is not my retirement plan, and
Hmm.
I think, again, is it great to have home values increase? Sure, but when I think about, as a parent, the chances of, if this continues, my kids being able to live anywhere near where they grew up are effectively zero. And
Yeah.
my fear is that people are going to understand that in 20 years, and it's going to be really challenging to do anything about that. Um, so anyway, we got lots
Yeah.
of changes.
One of my impressions as an outsider is that your region has basically had almost a straight line up in terms of growth for like 40 years. Probably, going back to the original research triangle days
Yep.
and everything else. I mean, is that accurate? Does that sort of track with reality?
I think straight line with maybe a little bit of hockey stick during COVID. I mean, I do think that accelerated during COVID. And I will say, since you brought up Research Triangle Park, that's 7,000 acres right in the middle of the triangle, and historically has been all suburban style office park. They
Mhm.
actually just as of a week ago, Wake County approved some of the new regulations that they're tracking towards making it legal to have a mix of uses across the Research Triangle Park. So again, that's a big scale change that's happening. Again, knock on wood that it
Mhm.
continues, but that's their Research Triangle 3.0. Folks you can Google it and look it up, but that would allow
Hmm.
people, as Scott Levitan, who's the CEO of the Research Triangle Park Foundation, says, it's the first time anybody will legally be allowed to sleep inside, on the grounds of Research Triangle Park in 70 years. But it's yeah, I mean the growth has been real, and it's I think in Wake County, 60 or 70 people a day, two or three classroom
Wow.
sizes of people move in every single day. And again, that goes back to the education piece. I'm not sure people kind of understand what that looks like, but when you think about it in real estate terms, that's, every 5 days is 350 people. And if you're looking
Mm.
at a standard multifamily complex, with two or 300 units, that's filling up, right? So once a week. And I think that's when it starts to hit home. It's like, well, wait a minute, we're not building that many places for these people to move to every week. So what does that mean? And it means tension and challenges.
So, I mean, obviously, it seems to me, again, just like looking from way far away, like the appeal has been, um, great jobs in the region going back a long time, great
Hmm.
universities. Uh, I won't talk about the basketball teams.
Okay,
We'll have a different
good.
discussion about
That
that.
you start fights.
But especially from from a University of Kansas grad
Yep.
perspective,
Yep.
but also North Carolina has nice weather. It's it's in the southern part of the United States, but not deep southern. So it's got you've got sort of a four season climate, but it's a whole lot warmer than say Ohio.
Hmm.
Is do you sort of have a sense of like where people are coming from?
So I think it's a lot of people from a lot of places. You get a lot of migration from kind of the northeastern markets. People getting away from the weather. I think the
Mhm.
universities bring people. They come from locally when they graduate, but they matriculate in from everywhere. So that's a big driver. And I don't know that we saw a ton of kind of West Coast tech transplant, but the tech,
Mhm.
that's got to be a big piece of it because we're rife with tech jobs, and so I think that's happening at a rapid pace. But it seems to be inbound from almost everywhere. Maybe not from Florida, but probably a good degree. I just think they're coming from everywhere. And
Mhm.
like you said, it's a balanced climate. It's really hot today, unfortunately. But
Mhm.
we're in the triangle, at least we're a couple hours to the beach, a couple hours to the mountains. So you kind of have it all. And for a
Yeah.
very long time, it was at a lower cost of living than average. And I think we're as a state getting very near average. And as a region here, I think we're above it now. And so I'm always interested to say, hey, when does that change where, we're not as much of a value proposition as we were. So
Right.
we'll see, but it's happening. And yes, people are still, we're in my day job, we're in the entitlements business. And so people are still moving here regularly. And that is driving a lot of projects to get entitled. The financing and construction is a little bit challenged right now, but
Mhm.
there's a lot of development activity in the pipeline.
Yeah, so it's interesting. Perhaps one of the things we share is that historically our regions have kind of been a haven for affordable living. That was it's always we've always been known a lot of Midwestern markets are known that way, but we've always been known as a market where you could really afford a pretty nice house at a great price, and there was a good job market to go with it. So
Hmm.
it's not like you were living in poverty. And it strikes me the triangle similar, but with all the popularity, do you feel like do you sense that there's any existential angst about that as sort of uh, something you promote to the world?
So I think, like, again, if you look historically, we were relatively more affordable. And again, the affordable word is a challenging one,
Right.
as you know. But again, I think relatively we're affordable. I think locally the challenge has been the the rates increase so fast, even on the development side. I mean, 10, 15 years ago, you didn't have office rents in the $50, $52 range, and now they are. And so you just look, is that more affordable than New York office space and San Francisco office space? Absolutely. But you look, and it wasn't that long ago that the rental rates for the newest office on the market were half of what they are now. And so
Hmm.
again, it's just a doubling in 15 years is kind of shocking. Um, and I do think anecdotally, what I've heard from people moving into the market since I've been here for 15 years now, that's a lie. I've been here for 11 years, 12 years, sorry. But I do think 5, 10 years ago, people were moving in from other markets and thought they were just getting a great deal. And I do feel I've had several conversations where people said, when my friends moved 5 years ago, they told me what they were able to get, from selling in DC or from selling in New York. And then I show up and it's a lot different than it was. So I think you are absolutely feeling that change happen. And yeah, that's going to be a natural challenge for I think
Yeah.
the foreseeable future.
And do you think that's what that change is kind of what's helped spur those discussions, especially at the state level, about reform when it
Yeah.
comes to housing?
I think it's gotten people's attention. And again, if you've been here, it's hard to fathom. Again, if you've owned a house and you've lived in one place for a long time, you don't necessarily see the change as it happens. And if you're not watching market data, you don't see it. But I think that it has gotten to a point where the feedback is reaching people regardless of if they're in the market or not, where you're just hearing of, hey, you know, um, it's gotten quite expensive compared to what it had been. And then you have the discussion of, well, why is that and what can we do about it? And the answer today is, well, we can build homes, but again, the least expensive new homes you're building, even townhomes are $400,000, where it was 200 not that long ago.
Hmm.
And they're also seeing the national news where lumber prices and materials and labor, I think that's when you start to dig into it and you say, well, how are we gonna reverse? And I don't know that there is a reverse. And then also when people are dependent on home values increasing, you say, well, do you really want that
Yeah.
to happen? Do you want people's home values to drop? And the answer is no. And so again, it's the Chuck Marohn housing trap conversation. It
Yeah.
does. I think people start to dig into it and realize it kind of feels like you're stuck and what can you do? And so they're making changes, and I think that's a good thing, but it's a challenge at the same time.
Are there certain things that you've identified from just kind of working in the business that you say it'd be nice if we could clear a path in with this process or this regulation or this approach? Things that would really help that you run across maybe on just on a professional basis.
So not in my day job, in my on the small scale front, I think one of the biggest things, and again why I think the ecosystem is so important, um, from an investment perspective, the real estate business is currently and for the foreseeable future will be an investment based business, and most real estate will be built by investors in the private market. The cities do a lot, state level. So there is public entity development, but it's not the majority. It's the very very vast minority. One change, the only thing I can think of that would allow for delivery of new housing, if we speak specifically for housing, it could work the same on commercial, but to a lesser degree. New housing stock that is theoretically could enter the market at a below market rate would be if people can develop on their own properties without a land transaction. And what I mean by that is, and again, that's just engaging more people as their own small scale developers. So if you bought a house in 1970 in Raleigh, your land basis might be $80,000. And so the cost of construction for building the ADU is going to be the same. It might cost $200,000 to build the ADU. But if your land basis is effectively zero, or let's just say it's $80,000, well, now your total cost for that ADU is $280,000. And you could do an
Yeah.
investor rate math on that and say, okay, well, that means I can rent it out at X dollars per month. Well, if I'm coming in and I need to buy a lot or buy a home to add an ADU to it, now my land basis is going to be 250 or 300,000 plus the 200,000 on top of that. My required rate of return, even if it's the same rate, my rent is going to have to be double what yours is. And so the only thing I can think of is how can we instigate more development without instigating transactions on the land side. So to me, that is people who already own property, getting them to be the developers. There is a possibility, and I've heard people talk about could you and I, Kevin, team up and develop on somebody else's land without them selling it
Yeah.
to us, then it just gets really complicated where it's like,
Sure.
hey,
Sure.
the investment group owns the ADU in my backyard, but I own the dirt and I own the house in the
Yeah.
front. So I don't know that that's the path
Yeah.
forward. I think the most viable path forward is just crystal clear streamlining people's ability to invest in their own backyards and on their own existing property without selling it to somebody else. And I think from a regulatory perspective, that can get streamlined. And it is, we have pre-approved plans for ADUs. They can streamline the process. You can even have incentives. But the missing piece to that is kind of the human piece of,
Yeah.
you still need to get the people who live in the homes to act. And so they may say,
Right.
well, I've never built a home. I don't know who to reach out to, to talk to. I don't know who would design the ADU, who would build it, how do I get the water from the street to my backyard? And again, all those questions I think could very easily be answered if there was a local group that they knew they could go to, and they say, well, shoot, Sally down the road built an ADU, and
Yeah.
Sally, how did you know that? Because there are firms that build, there's I talked to a group last week in Durham that's a design build company. They don't do exclusively ADUs, but that's a lot of what they do. um, but if you don't know who those people are, the barrier to entry is quite high. Even if you have the financial resources, even if you have the land, just the knowledge piece is really, really hard. And that's where I think there's a huge opportunity. Again, if the public sector is doing their regulatory thing, that's great. That's going to be required. But there also is this required piece of kind of community and education to get people to act, to reduce that fear of, you know, I don't want to mess this up, or it's hard. I got other things
Yeah.
going on in my life. I don't want to deal with hard things. So that to me would be a really cool thing to see. That, and I don't know if anyone else, um, other cities have done that, but I think it's a two pronged approach.
Yeah, it seems like, if you can figure out how to get those first guinea pigs to actually take the risk and learn through that process, and if they're successful with it, their neighbors, then we'll see it, and then you can gradually expand that into a real thing once people understand it. But
Yeah.
it's such a new deal for most people, and it's harder. I mean, like, I guess like 100 years ago, um, a, a fair number of people would have just built something themselves on a property like that, or they would have had a friend or a family member who could build things, and they would just build a little backyard cottage and hook up the water to it and be done with it. And everything about that process is so much more challenging
Yeah.
today, uh, and understanding how to navigate it is really it's a skill.
Well, and I think we just, again, as a society, over time, we've just become farther and farther removed from doing the things, right? So,
Yeah,
we all wear clothes. I don't know many people that make clothes. 150 years ago,
right,
people knew how to
right,
do that. Same thing with food, same thing with shelter, like all the
yeah,
things. Now it's, that knowledge lives in somebody else's head, which is great for lots of things. Again, I have a whole wardrobe full of clothes that I wouldn't have had 150 years ago. So it's good. And again, it's back to that tension. It's not good or bad. It just means, though, that knowledge doesn't live within the community nearly as much. Um,
yeah,
and so that's a challenge.
yeah. So, Jed, as you think about your future at some point when you are able to maybe get back and start to do a project or some projects yourself, what do you imagine doing?
So I do think the first step, um, is likely going to be, I live in a townhouse. I've got a backyard that's, postage stamp. So it's not going to be an ADU in my backyard. I do see an avenue where building an ADU in somebody else's backyard, or helping, I don't know if it's a consulting approach, but helping instigate that project and allow people to participate. I mean, that to me is the way that knowledge sharing scales. It's great if I can do it, and I have no doubt that I could do it and that you can do it. But if you get more people brought to the table in the process, and again, that could be if I'm developing on a neighbor's, helping a neighbor develop an ADU in their backyard. Now you've got two parties involved. If we're maybe raising some short-term financing from two or three friends or some people in the community, well, now you've got five people involved. And then again, theoretically,
Mhm.
those five people could say, okay, well, that wasn't that bad. Maybe I can go spread. And so if you get five people to teach five people to teach five people, it goes way out. Because again, to me, it's not necessarily about the financial driver. It's the education base. At some point, I would love to be able to, purchase homes and densify within homes and ideally share very transparently about all that, because again, I just think most people don't get to see behind the curtain. And I think most people on the development side are highly incentivized not to share any information. And you touched on it earlier with the political
Yeah.
thing, where it's like, hey, if I accidentally ruffle some feathers, I'm going to be in trouble, and this is my
Yeah.
livelihood. So I think
Yeah.
if and when I get back into it, it's not going to be my livelihood. It's going to be part time by definition. And does that give me some flexibility to not only share in the process with people who can participate alongside me, but also share more transparently? And I don't know if that's videos or blog or something like that, or podcast, but it's like, hey, here's the process. Here's what we're going through. Here's the hurdles we're facing. I think that would be give more people a front row seat in that transparency would be pretty cool. So I think that's the avenue, is trying to partner with people to add density where they could benefit. Because I have no doubt that there are no fewer than 100 people within an eighth of a mile of where I'm standing right now that could absolutely use some help and benefit from some densification on their property, but they just have no idea where to start or how to start. And
Right.
that to me seems like a pretty cool avenue to approach it. And again, even before that is bringing the people together. And I think that's also a way to find those people, because if they show up to our Monday meetup and say, hey, I'd like to build an ADU in my backyard, but I have no idea where to start, great, come on in, we'll show you. And I think that's, again, the way that it grows and spreads, and you bring just more people into the process.
Well, that's really cool. I fully endorse it. I think you ought to go for it. Yeah, as soon as you can.
The seeds are
Don't let
being
any moss
planted
grow
as
under
we
your feet.
speak.
Okay, good, good. You never know what's around the corner, so you might as well get started on the things that you really want to do.
That's right.
That's my feeling about it. Uh, Jed, what is if people want to track you down and hear your podcast and everything, what's the best way to find you?
Sure. So oakcitycre.com is where you can find all things podcast and newsletter. But I think if people resonate with this message, or really if you have helped instigate an ecosystem of small scale develop, if you're the Abby Newsham of some other market, I would love to connect with you. So Jed Byrne on LinkedIn, Byrne. I don't know that I'm the only Jed Byrne out there, but there's probably not many, and certainly not many in Raleigh. So find me on LinkedIn or at the website and reach out, because I would love to hear, how it's worked for you, your wins and challenges, because I think the biggest thing we could do is just bring people together and help spread some of that education and resource to help get more people involved in this process.
Well, that's terrific. I mean, like I said, I think there's so much interesting overlap between your region and ours, and there's a couple others in the country where I've really connected with like groups of people,
Yep.
Northwest Arkansas, Oklahoma City, et cetera. That there's just a bunch of people doing really cool things, and
Yep.
places that are not always necessarily like the top of the list that are going to be on articles circulating nationwide, but a lot of similar people grappling with similar problems, and
Yep.
so it's great to connect and learn from each other. And I really appreciate. I'm glad you were able to come here and see what we're
Me
dealing
too.
with, and then hopefully we can return the favor at some point.
Yep, me too. And again, I think as a community of people on the small scale side of things are also just very giving and sharing, right? I mean, I had Monty
Yeah.
Anderson. It hasn't been released yet, but I had Monty Anderson on my podcast, and again, he anytime I reach out, which I tried to not to because I know how many
Mhm.
people he's helping, but anytime you reach out, he is happy to pick up the phone, jump on a call, and share everything that he knows. And so again, I think he's
Yeah.
one of hundreds of people out there like that. So it's an
Yeah.
exciting time to be involved in this, and I think there's a very much brighter future headed forward. So appreciate the
Yeah.
time you took to share with me, both in Kansas City and here. And yeah, the best is yet to come, I think.
I agree. So, all right. Well, Jed, take care. Thanks so much for doing this. And we'll look forward to hearing your podcast as well sometime soon.
Sounds good. Thank you, Kevin.
You bet.